And this is what Trump had to say in his Truth Social post. He's brought the hammer. And now Trump explicitly calls out South Africa for genocide. He says it. No hesitation whatsoever. Not answering a reporter's question, which has been happening all year long, the few times he mentioned. He unequivocally says genocide. So here's what he said. The United States did not attend the G20 in South Africa because the South African government refuses to acknowledge or address the horrific human rights abuses endured by Afrikaners and other descendants of Dutch, French, and German settlers. To put it more bluntly, they are killing white people and randomly allowing their farms to be taken from them. Perhaps, worst of all, the soon-to-be out-of-business New York Times and fake news media won't issue a word against this genocide. That's why all the liars and pretenders of the radical left media are going out of business. At the conclusion of the G20, South Africa refused to hand off the G20 presidency to a senior representative from our embassy who attended the closing ceremony. Therefore, at my direction, South Africa will not be receiving an invitation to the 2026 G20, which will be hosted in the great city of Miami, Florida, next year. South Africa has demonstrated to the world they are not a country worthy of membership anywhere. We are going to stop all payments and subsidies to them effective immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Wow, there's no hesitation, no equivocation there. South Africa has demonstrated to the world that they are not a country worthy of membership anywhere. Well, that's a salvo. Now you're on Trump's radar. And I asked the ANC not to misbehave and assault him and attack him. And they spent the entire week of the G20 mocking and laughing about President Trump. Well, folks, it finally happened. For the better part of this 2025 calendar year, we've heard from South African politicians and the captured media in South Africa in particular, but also in Washington, how Donald Trump has been obsessed with South Africa and he's attacked South Africa when nothing could be further from the truth. It's been quite the opposite. The ANC senior politicians are the ones obsessed with Donald Trump and misleading people about what's happening. The only thing Trump did to South Africa is when Cyril Ramaphosa tried to mislead the world by famously signing the Expropriation Without Compensation Act, by the way, a piece of legislation that is unconstitutional. It violates Section 25 of the South African Constitution, their own constitution. Mind you, a constitution drafted by a majority black government in post-apartheid South Africa and ratified by a majority black government in post-apartheid South Africa and been in effect since 1996. That constitution is one they created, one of the most liberal constitutions in the world. And it protects private property rights, saying that the government may expropriate property, but only with the consent of the owner and with adequate and just compensation. Well, they passed a piece of legislation that defies that. So when Ramaphosa tried to make a lot of hay to the leftists around the world in Davos, signing it there in a place that's supposed to be about capitalism, he had already misled South Africa because this thing had actually been signed into law 34 days prior in December. Now, why 34 days? Well, that matters because in South Africa, under the law, under the Constitution, if 1/3 of the members of parliament disagree with a piece of legislation that's been approved by the majority and they oppose it and they sign a petition, it goes to the Constitutional Court for review, automatically jumping every level. There's no appellate. Supreme Court of Appeal right past it, the Constitutional Court, and they review it to determine the constitutionality of the law that was passed by the majority. And if it's unconstitutional, it gets rejected. But by waiting over 30 days, there was no opportunity for anyone to put together 132 or so members of the parliament to oppose this. So they misled the country. But that's background information. When he signed this in Davos, violating it, he basically abrogated private property rights, which made South Africa ineligible for the African Growth and Opportunity Act because this key tenet of participation is respect for private property rights. It's also a violation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, clear violation of human rights. South Africa is a signatory to that agreement through the United Nations. They violated by signing this piece of legislation. So Trump said, you know what, we are not going to give money to people who are abrogating private property rights. You can't have a country like that. So he said, we're stopping all foreign assistance. And at the same time, because of what's been going on with the government denial of rural attacks and the race-based laws directed against racial minorities, but Afrikaners in particular, Trump said, you know what, I'm going to open up a refugee program for racial minorities from South Africa. Now, of course, the media for the better part of a year have been lying about the program, and they continue to lie about the program, including CNN. I was interviewed by Donnie O'Sullivan, didn't make it into the broadcast, and that's fine with me. But he interviewed me, and he said, what gives Donald Trump the right to bring white farmers over here? I said, well, he's not bringing white farmers over. Yes, but he is. I said, no, he's not. You go to the U.S. Embassy website, za.usembassy.gov. It's been there since the 10th of February. It says racial minorities. And in fact, that's what's been happening. Coloreds, Indians, whites, and Afrikaners have been coming over here since that time frame. So the media willfully ignore this information, and it's just utter nonsense. So back to what's going on here. Donald Trump has had enough. He's had enough. Over the past year, the government in South Africa, the politicians have continually insulted Donald Trump since he stopped foreign aid. Over 400 million, close to 500 million per year, $500 million. Much of it for the president's emergency program for AIDS relief. Mind you, an emergency program created in 2003 for a 5-year period. Here we are in 2025, 22 years later, and we're still giving billions of dollars to fight HIV, something that's the responsibility of the government of South Africa and the people of South Africa, not the American taxpayer. But we're doing it 22 years later. Why? Because this is how our government operates. They're idiots. But the program should have been wound down in a much more responsible fashion than President Trump did it, but that's not germane. The issue here is that for 22 years, South Africa has abrogated its responsibility in taking care of its own citizens and relied on America to pick up the dime. And when we stopped doing it, they started insulting us. And one insult after another. When they came to D.C. at their own request and Trump rescheduled his calendar, Cyril Ramaphosa showed up 34 minutes late to a meeting with the President of the United States. What is he, on Africa time? It's ridiculous. It was an insult, a grave insult. And then Trump was very patient with them, but then Ramaphosa sat there and lied to him. I know nothing about this protest about Glenn and Vita Rafferty, despite the fact that everyone in South Africa knew about it. It was on a banner. It said right there, Ramaphosa, stop this from happening. You know, and the media chose to lie about what happened there. And the media lied about Trump. And Ramaphosa came back after dimming the lights in Natalie and mocked President Trump at an event in South Africa, in Johannesburg, along with Dean McPherson, laughing like hyenas. I thought I was back in the White House. The lights went out. Dim the lights, Natalie. And he mocked President Trump. And then it goes on and on from there. And they continue to mock President Trump. They continue to lie about him. President Trump never is the one to accuse South African genocide until today. He has said genocide in the past, but in response to a reporter's question. In fact, when he's asked this question on May 21st, 2025 in the Oval Office by Annika Larsen said, now that President Ramaphosa is here, do you still believe there's a white genocide in South Africa? To which Donald Trump said, he paused for a fact and said, I'm not convinced of that. But the media didn't cover that. They never said that Trump wasn't convinced of white genocide. They continue to lie about Trump and insult him. Meanwhile, he's busy with Gaza and Ukraine and the Democrats and tariffs and everything under the sun. Not much time to focus on South Africa. But South Africans are politicians so obsessed in navel gazing, thinking they're important. You're not. You're just around here, and it's not an issue for Trump. He's not paying attention to you. But now you're becoming an issue. You put yourself on his radar screen. And how did this all unfold? Multiple insults during the week of the G20. We've got Ronald Lamola going on CNN's Misinfo Nation White Genocide documentary by Donny O'Sullivan, calling President Trump a white supremacist. This is the second senior official from the African National Congress to do that this year. Of course, Ibrahim Rasool was PNG, persona non grata, kicked out of the United States for doing something similar as a accredited diplomat, calling the president leader of global white supremacy and America racist. So that's two senior ANC officials. One recently on November 16th, as the summer is getting underway, the business and all the stuff on the side. So Lamola insults the president. Then, during the course of the summit, the week, then Ramaphosa is not asked a question, but a statement made by a reporter saying, you will not be bullied, to which, rather than taking the high road and saying, well, we're a sovereign nation. What are you talking about? The United States is a sovereign nation. Nations have difference of opinion. We don't agree on these issues. But no one could bully us. What are you talking about? We're not bullying anyone. They're not bullying us. That would have been the high road. But instead he said, we will not be bullied. We will not allow ourselves to be bullied. Very arrogant. And then from there, we've got another situation where it goes on from there. And Ramaphosa is talking to an SABC executive who says, well, very bad things are happening in South Africa. And to which Ramaphosa starts mocking and laughing about Trump. Yes, very bad things. And, this is not a good look at all. And, the South African government put that online for people to see. They shared that. They want people to see Ramaphosa mocking President Trump. And then Trump and the U.S. Embassy said they weren't going to participate. They told them well in advance, said we're not going to be there, and so we're not going to be there. And then they followed through with what normal diplomatic chains are, a note verbal to inform the South African government that they would send an official to receive the handoff, the baton being handed over at the end of the summit after it's over. Well, instead of taking the high road and saying, given the gravity of the situation, a head of state, we prefer to hand over to head of state, but since the Americans aren't going to be here, we don't feel it's appropriate, we should be handing over to someone who's not a head of state or a cabinet minister. What we'll do is transfer this appropriate level to the senior representative from the United States Embassy, the charge d'affaires, and we'll give it to him at the Director of International Relations Cooperation or Foreign Ministry. That would have been the right way to go. But no, we will not. We are being insulted. We being handing off to a junior official. One of the most seasoned diplomats on the planet, bar none. 27 years of diplomatic experience, having served all over the world. No, I'm sorry. This is ridiculous. He's a senior diplomat. More diplomatic experience than any of the people we're talking about here. Vincent Magwenya, Crispin Piri, Fikiri Mabalula, Ronald Lamola, or Cyril Ramaphosa. None of them have the esteem and experience that this guy has in diplomacy. To call him a junior official is an insult to the highest order. And Trump, tonight, laid down the hammer. That's it. He's not going to tolerate this anymore. That's it, folks. Trump has had enough. Like I said, not going to fly. And lying. And I forgot to mention that Ramaphosa lied. Ramaphosa came out after that no verbal was sent over and said, well, and he laughed again and mocked President Trump. Well, now the Americans want to come. I guess we'll have to, we're talking to them about what level of participation. That's a lie. That was never the case. That's not what the note verbal says. They coordinate this days in advance, and that is not the truth. Carolyn Levitt explained that. So look, it's on like Donkey Kong now, folks. And I warn this is where we're headed. And Trump, not paying attention to South Africa, got other business, Gaza, Ukraine, Democrats, tariffs, a lot of stuff on his plate. Now has time to focus a little bit of time, apparently, on South Africa, and it is not going to go well for the South African government. Things are going to get very dicey for them very soon. This is unfortunate. It was all unnecessary. It was avoidable. Instead of lying to South Africans that you were negotiating for lowering tariffs when there's no one in Washington, D.C., there's no trade representative, no ambassador, instead of mocking President Trump, you should have made genuine diplomatic efforts. You claim in the President Ramaphosa's response to this that you've spent the whole year trying to negotiate with the United States. That's not true. You sent a team to D.C. and you lied to the President in the Oval Office. You got caught. And it doesn't matter how much the fake media in South Africa prop you up, it doesn't change what happened there. And now, you're on his screen. You're on the radar. You're not a blip. You're a big blip. And that was a huge mistake. It's a shame. It's a shame. Hopefully, cooler heads prevail. But at the moment, it doesn't look like it. What say you, South Africa? South Africa? Mzansi? Cheers.